An abusive partner and years of violent attacks left her with nothing and nowhere to go.
I was so depleted of everything that when you're ready to leave with just a shirt on your back, you know it's time to go.
Tonight, a Spokane woman shares her horrifying story of how domestic violence stripped her of her identity, her family, and her home. Once she was able to work up the strength to leave her abuser, she was left with nothing and nowhere to turn, eventually becoming homeless.
She's not alone. One local nonprofit says 90% of the women they work with to find housing in Spokane have been abused by their partner or a family member. 4 News Now reporter Taylor Graham continues our End the Violence coverage with the relationship between domestic violence and homelessness. Taylor.
Well, so often when we talk about domestic violence, we talk about statistics and numbers, but the real stories come from the women who live through the unimaginable abuse, like the woman I spoke with, who freed herself, only to then find herself living on the streets before she came to Spokane and found hope. Her story, like so many others, is hard to hear, but it's important.
You don't feel worthy. You don't feel capable of taking care of yourself. You've been, told that you're nothing and you're worthless. I was always second guessing myself. And I believed that because, he would just beat these things into my head all day long.
For 5 years, Tam was trapped in a haze of self-doubt as the man who claimed he loved her staked a claim on her mind, her body, and her soul.
He had pushed me down, and he was a big man, and had just bounced on my neck and my head to the side to where it crushed 4 discs.
She was broken in every sense of the word.
You really get down to a point where you have no choice but just to start over.
It seems simple, but in reality, she was stripped down to a shell of who she used to be. She was left with nothing and no one to turn to.
I didn't ever think I would be homeless, and I didn't ever think I would be beaten down the way I was, but it can happen fast.
It wasn't until her aunt told her about Spokane and all the help that was waiting for her here, when the haze she had been trapped in for so long faded away and things were more clear than they'd been in 5 years.
You can't get this kind of help back where I was.
Her sister drove her here, where she found Transitions, a local nonprofit that's dedicated to helping women get back up on their feet. The volunteers and the women there are no stranger to Tam's story.
About 90% of the women we serve in our housing programs have experienced domestic violence, and is generally a contributing factor to their homelessness.
Transition Shelter for Single Women, Miriam's house, gave Tam the clarity and the resources she needed to rebuild her life.
Once you finally stop and get help, you're no longer a victim. Like, you take your power back.
Now she can picture what's ahead. Her future is clear.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
And it's bright.
I'm not running scared. I'm actually experienced joy today.
And obviously so much to cover in Tam's story. She not only had to give up her home, but she left behind her job and her family to escape that relationship. And she still kind of carries reminders of it everywhere she goes. She has problems with her neck and her knees because of that abuse. But when you look back on all that she's gone through, you realize really how much she was able to overcome in just 9 months being at Transitions, which is so incredible. I'm so blown away by her.
Very hopeful.
Yeah. It's amazing what they do there.
And Transitions, thankfully, is just one of many of the resources you can find here in Spokane. If you're in trouble, there is help. Lutheran Community Services offers a 24-hour crisis line you can text or call. You can also call the YWCA and the National Domestic Violence Hotline at any time. We also have a list online at KXLY.com.